Very good morning to everyone, and let me join my colleague Peter in warmly welcoming all of you to the National University of Singapore. This morning I'd like to speak about developing Asia's leaders, and I think it's a good thing that I'm coming after Dr. Kaka, Professor Kaka, because while he's spoken about engineering education as a form of specialized and professional education, what I'd like to turn attention to more particularly is broadly based education for developing what I think are a different kind of talent and leaders in the context of Asia. In particular, I'd like to talk about how in today's Asia and in Asia of the years ahead, not only do we continue to need specialized leaders in specialized fields like engineering, medicine, and so forth, we will also need a particular cadre of leaders who are broadly educated and globally prepared. The reason for that is because I think the world has become much more complex, much more globalized. Challenges that the world faces are large scale and they keep shifting. And as a consequence, there is a need for what I see to be broadly educated leaders who are not only specialized in particular disciplines, but who can make connections across disciplines, across different domains of knowledge. So what these new leaders, I think, need are both a breadth and a depth of knowledge, an ability to see connections across different domains of knowledge, of expertise, to be able to think critically and to engage in analytical thinking and problem solving, and very importantly, to be able to communicate persuasively, both in writing and in presentation. At the same time, because the world has become so much more interconnected, globalization, of course, is not a new thing. Some would argue that globalization occurred way back when. But the extent, the scale, the spread of globalization perhaps is much more intense today than it was in the past, and therefore the need for globally prepared leaders is perhaps more acute today than it ever was. So these globally prepared leaders are ones, I would suggest, who are well prepared to succeed and to contribute in this complex world, where they are required to work across cultures in different contexts, where different cultures are sort of rubbing against one another, and there is a need to be able to navigate that sort of environment. So let me first focus on broadly educated leaders, and then I will turn to globally educated leaders, globally prepared leaders in the second part of my presentation. As I mentioned, I think the need for people who are able to think strategically, to plan by drawing together different domains of information and knowledge, to be able to interpret changing global conditions. These are the sorts of qualities I think that we need in our leaders, particularly in a rapidly developing Asia. We've heard most recently about big data, about data that is drawn from many different sources, particularly facilitated by technology. So for example, when you have data that's collected because we're using our credit cards, and all that data that's stored in there about who's buying what kinds of consumer profiles we have, what kinds of goods and services are being purchased, that sort of big data that cannot be analyzed easily. The ability to marshal that kind of expansive resource data and resources to be able to make effective decisions and to guide teams of diverse people to make these good decisions. That's the nature of the increasingly complex and globalized world, and therefore the need for people and leaders who are able to deal with that kind of complexity and globalization. I've spoken about the kinds of qualities of such leaders already, and perhaps in a sense this is not entirely new. In the 18th century already, we've had people talk about how education begins a gentleman and conversation completes him. So the person who is able to draw on different domains of knowledge, to make sense of it, and to be able to speak about it convincingly and persuasively. Well, education begins the gentleman, but reading, good company, and reflection must finish him. So while we have people who are able to deal with complex data, etc., the ability to communicate it, to reflect on it, and to make good conversation about it would be equally important. Now, in the context of Singapore, at a fairly recent event involving the public service, the Deputy Prime Minister had this to say: do the right things and do them right. What did he mean by that? I want to quote him verbatim because I think he captures some of what I'm trying to say quite succinctly. I quote, "The complex issues faced by Singapore will not fall neatly within a single domain. You will increasingly have to work with and lead multi-agency and multidisciplinary teams. Admin officers are therefore expected to have good multidisciplinary capabilities, to have breadth of knowledge and experience across several domains, and the mental agility to connect the dots across organizational boundaries and functional areas." I want to turn attention to what NUS has been doing in this regard, and to cultivate in students an ability to connect the dots, as the Deputy Prime Minister was saying, to make connections across different domains of knowledge, and to be able to communicate effectively and persuasively this kind of knowledge and analysis that hopefully they are capable of. There are three areas that I want to speak about a little bit: general education, the University Scholars Program, and Yale NUS College. The Yale NUS College is an example of liberal arts education, and there it offers me an opportunity to open out again to the kinds of initiatives that have been developed in other parts of Asia, particularly China and South Korea. So let me take each of those in turn. General education, first of all. General education is not a new thing at NUS. It was developed about 10 years ago. The idea was to broaden out education from the time when NUS was very much focused on sort of specialized and professional learning at an early stage. Not unlike the British tradition with a single major that was a very big part of the curriculum. About 10 years ago, the attempt was made to introduce general education so that students would learn to broaden out, and the whole concept underlying the general education program was to develop a more educated, a more rounded person. The attempts were modest. Students had to do 2 general education modules initially, and then the idea was to develop this to 4 modules over the entire candidature at NUS. NUS right now is in the midst of a revamp in looking at how to still broaden out further students' education, so that if one was an engineer, as we were hearing of the IIT students, you don't just do engineering, you do more than that. You do the humanities and social sciences and so forth, right? So the ability to engage in multi and interdisciplinary learning, the ability to think more critically, to reflect, to question, and very importantly, to learn to be able to work in teams and to communicate well. How will this revamp be conducted? So the thinking is to develop 4 pillars, right? I apologize for going into some detail, but I think it's important for us to get a sense of the philosophy in broadening out education, that it is not just, in a sense, anything goes, that you read anything, you do anything, but that there is a certain buffet, but a buffet in which you are engaged in making sure that you have some carbs, some proteins, etc., right? So it's a guided buffet, if I might put it that way. So the 4 pillars that are currently under discussion are as follows. Singapore Studies, located in Singapore, and an effort to try and get students to understand the complexity of Singapore society, what makes it work, what are the issues and challenges that Singapore society faces, broadening out to looking at human cultures and endeavors more broadly, cultures and civilizations, both Asian, Western, and other civilizations and cultures. The thinking that a generally educated person is one who is also numerically literate, that you're able to read, for example, a newspaper article that throws at you all kinds of statistics and not to be able to swallow it lock, stock and barrel and to think that that is the be-all and end-all. Particularly in an age where we are bombarded with data from all over the place, to be able to make sense of it and to question it. So quantitative reasoning and information literacy. And fourthly, thinking and expression. The ability to critically evaluate, but also to communicate the analysis persuasively. There is the thinking that cutting across all of this would be what we would call deep dialogues, the ability to engage in a particular grand challenge, or a greater good theme. What do we mean by that? We're faced with the world is faced with so many big challenges: climate change, the aging population, environmental challenges, right? That cut across transnational boundaries, that cut across cultures. Now, this requires multidisciplinary knowledge in order to tackle the challenges. It requires that we're both contemporary and futuristic, but in our approach. But I would also add historical, looking back in order to look forward. The ability to tackle complex real-world problems. Now, bringing it all together in a particular module that encourages students to think through these issues. And therefore, to achieve, through all of these methods, a competence, a set of values, and a certain set of habits of mind. Right? So not just knowledge, but a certain habit of mind. General education is meant to be available to all students on campus. In fact, more than available, it's required of all students on campus. The University Scholars Program is directed at a particular group of students, and in this particular instance, some of the best and brightest students in different faculties, from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences to the Faculty of Law, to the Faculty of Engineering, Computing, Science, and so forth, and Business. It's been on offer since 2001, so it's a dozen years old, and it's meant to allow students to continue with their specialization in a particular discipline, but also to broaden out in roughly the equivalent of a year's curriculum, and to engage in small group learning with the ability to engage in a strong writing program. Now, the curriculum again focuses on various dimensions: a foundation tier that emphasizes writing and critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, and a university scholars seminar; an inquiry tier that is divided into humanities and social sciences and sciences and technologies, the belief that a generally educated, well-rounded person needs to know all of these dimensions, and culminating again in a reflection tier that is a senior seminar. I won't go into the details, but you can see the philosophy underlying the program that is about broadening communication, analytical thinking, and so forth. This is, while general education, as I mentioned, is for everybody, this is for a particular group of students to challenge them still further. The Yale NUS College brings this idea even further. So, whereas University Scholars Program offers roughly the equivalent of a year of that kind of education, the Yale NUS College tries to do this for all 4 years of their education. The Yale NUS College is Singapore's first fully fledged liberal arts college, a collaboration with Yale University, and it's a full 4-year program to commence next year. It's a segue for me into speaking about liberal arts education more generally. In the context of the United States, or the West more generally, liberal arts education is very often a cornerstone of broad-based education. It does so by providing interdisciplinary opportunities for analytical problem solving and adaptive learning. And the sorts of characteristics that I spoke about earlier, the ability to think creatively, innovatively, expansively, to express themselves persuasively, to operate ethically as citizens to making a difference in a constantly transforming world. These are the sorts of characteristics that you find described of many liberal arts programs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in Asia, this is something that has been given increasing attention in recent years. In South Korea, in China, in Singapore in particular, there's a lot of conversation going on about introducing liberal arts education into what has essentially been a system of education that has emphasized specialization and professionalization, particularly in the early years, in undergraduate years. In South Korea, for example, I cite the example of Underwood International College, which is a part of Yonsei University, established in 2006, the country's first all-English four-year liberal arts college. And it attempts to bring students from Korea and around the world with an interest in liberal arts education of the form that I have just described. In China, there's been a growth of dozens of new Chinese liberal arts institutions formed in the mold of elite US colleges. The Chinese government and many educators have begun talking quite a bit about how traditional professional education is important, but perhaps not sufficient in giving students adequate analytical and problem-solving skills. So some of what we heard about from Professor Ying a moment ago in terms of the shifts in Chinese higher education towards more broad-based learning, analytical, questioning modes of learning, which is a departure from the previous norms, or perhaps even the existing norms. Perhaps the first sign of change, but my Chinese colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, was a 1998 directive from the Ministry of Education that allowed universities to begin small liberal arts programs on their campuses. We've already heard the example of Shanghai Jiaotong University, so I won't go there. I will cite a few other examples. Fudan University in 2005 started Fudan College, which is modeled after Yale's residential colleges with a core curriculum. United International College in South China, and more than 50 other universities in China experimenting with not a full-fledged liberal arts college, but liberal arts components within the larger curriculum. This fall, a new liberal arts college called Xinwei College in Shanghai has opened its doors to the inaugural class of 30 students. New York University next year will begin its campus in Shanghai, developing liberal arts college together with, I believe it's Huadong, East China Normal University. That's right. Also a liberal arts program. So you see there's a growing interest in this sort of thing. I don't suggest that this is to replace specialized and professional education. Good grief, no. If I'm going to walk on a bridge, I would like a full-fledged engineer to have built it, not a liberal arts graduate. But perhaps liberal arts education could partner and complement the professional and specialized education in positive ways. I have a few more slides about liberal arts education, but I realize that I am speaking rather too much about this and time is short. I do want to quote Dr. Nolene Hazer, who is a proud alum of NUS, the current Undersecretary General of the United States and Executive Secretary of UNESCO. And she says, liberal arts education encourages students to be always open to and fascinated by the vast and various, sometimes contradictory realms of human experience. This is the kind of learning that shapes mindful individuals, engaged citizens, and enlightened leaders who can navigate across diverse landscapes of knowledge and respond imaginatively to the challenges and opportunities of our time. I want to pause and say something about the US experience. I thought back there because liberal arts colleges have a presence there that they don't have in other parts of the world. The US experience suggests that liberal arts education uniquely prepares students for lives of service, achievement, leadership, and personal fulfillment. In a May 2012 study called Liberal Arts and Leadership by someone from Grinnell College, a liberal arts college, the following facts were established. Only 2.2% of students who are enrolled in US undergraduate programs attend the 270 liberal arts colleges that exist in the US. This is a small proportion compared to the much larger range of different kinds of higher education institutions in the US. But if you look at their achievements, liberal arts college graduates are represented disproportionately among leaders in business, in non-profit, and in government. 11.3% of the leaders across the three sectors graduated from liberal arts colleges, whereas only 2.2% attended such colleges. So very specifically, if you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, 11% of those CEOs are from liberal arts colleges. If you look at the non-profit sector, in the Chronicle of Philanthropies, top philanthropy 400 individuals, characters, 11.8% are from liberal arts colleges. In government, 12% of US senators are from US liberal arts colleges. Is that a good thing or not? Let me turn attention to globally prepared leaders. Now, I've talked quite a bit about broad-based learning, particularly about the strategies for broad-based learning, whether it's through general education, through a special program like the University Scholars Program, or a full-fledged liberal arts education through a liberal arts college. What is as important, I think, in the world today and in the world ahead, and we've heard this from our other two speakers already, is to have leaders who are globally prepared. Because the world is so globalized, people are moving across boundaries at such speed and scale that is unprecedented. Goods and services and financial instruments are moving across boundaries very rapidly. This sort of globalization is an opportunity as well as a challenge. How do we prepare our students? How do we develop our talents to deal with this sort of complex globalized world? Universities can play an important role in today's evolving landscape by providing a global education that is transformative for the students. I particularly liked Professor Ying's characterization of how educational institutions, higher educational institutions, are both for education and for research. Sometimes we forget. I really do want to focus on the transformative education that we can provide for our students, and in this particular case, global education. It is one that nurtures our students to be globally prepared, who are able to contribute to an understanding of a complex globalized world, and also to be able to work effectively across cultures. At NUS, we think that we have a strategic location in the heart of Asia to contribute to an understanding of all things Asian. And our vision is indeed to be a leading global university centered in Asia, which means having special expertise, insights, and partnerships within Asia. So you see that this particular forum, for example, is co-organized with India and China, and with our institutes within NUS, the Institute of South Asian Studies, the East Asia Institute, which is all to say that we are placing a great deal of emphasis on understanding Asia and contributing to Asia. We try and do this by giving our students the opportunity to experience the world. So we try and bring our students into the world, particularly Asia, but not only Asia, and bringing the world to NUS. How do we try and bring the world to NUS? The population here is highly diverse, students and faculty from 100 countries, 18% of our undergraduates, and actually growing on to 70% of graduate students from abroad. Every year we have more than 1,600 exchange students But we also try and ensure that there is internationalization at home, by which we mean developing educational programs here in Singapore in partnership with universities from around the world. So we have, for example, a Singapore MIT Alliance, a Duke NUS Graduate Medical School, the Yale NUS College, which I've mentioned already. But we don't just try and do this internationalization at home through collaboration. In our curriculum, in our co-curriculum, we also try and ensure that there is cross-cultural and global learning opportunities for our students. We also try and ensure that we take students to the world. So 60% of our undergraduates, more than 60% of our undergraduates actually go overseas at least once during their candidature with us. For different lengths of time. 28% go for more than 6 months, the rest for less than 6 months. We've worked very hard at ensuring that there are reciprocal student exchange arrangements, and this is currently with more than 300 universities in 40 countries. There are double degrees, joint degrees, concurrent degrees with top universities internationally, and we also have overseas colleges in different parts of the world, which I will speak about if there is an opportunity later. The kinds of education programs that we have with an overseas component take these different forms. I've mentioned some of them already. The shorter term ones, summer programs, research attachments, internships where we get the real world experience, community service, field trips, and so forth. The next few slides offer many examples of the kinds of opportunities that students have. I won't go into them individually. I'm going to sort of move through the slides fairly quickly, but it will give you an opportunity to get a sense of the types of opportunities that are available. They make me envious of the students today. I wish I had those opportunities when I was a student, although that was rather long ago. So I want to pause a little bit and talk about NUS overseas colleges because it's quite a distinctive proposition that many people I speak to always ask for more details on. They're rather intrigued by this program. These are overseas colleges that actually don't have a physical presence overseas. That's a question that's always asked of us, but no, we don't have physical presence overseas. What this does is it offers students a year's opportunity to work as an intern in startup companies in these different places, from exciting Silicon Valley to up-and-coming Shanghai, right? And during the year that they're there in startup companies, they do all kinds of work with the startup companies, and some would say this is the best way to learn, right? Because you're right there with the entrepreneurs trying to make something of that particular endeavor, that particular startup. They are also taking courses with our partner institutions on entrepreneurship or technopreneurship courses, and some of our partner institutions include Stanford, UPenn, Fudan, and so forth. I will end off, I went through those slides fairly quickly, but as I said, happy to provide more examples and details of what you've missed, since you are presumably beyond the student age already, but what is open and available to students today. I want to end off by reminding ourselves of what it is we're trying to do here in terms of talent development. I think we believe that every student who comes to us has a particular talent, whether it's academic talent, entrepreneurial talent, cultural talent, whatever it might be. And what we want to try and do is to develop those talents, round them up through broad-based learning, right? You might be a real nerd and have real interest and knowledge in physics and a particular small niche of astrophysics, for example. But we think that it's important for you to round up, to be more broad-based, and so the broadly based learning. And we also think that it's important, especially in this little red dot, where Singapore is tiny, it's easy to grow up here, not knowing very much of the rest of the world, to have a global education. whether it's a global education by being in Singapore or global education by having the opportunities to actually engage in experiential learning and academic learning overseas. So broadly educated leaders with these sorts of characteristics that I've already spoken about, through the initiatives that I have enumerated earlier, globally prepared leaders with these sorts of characteristics which I've already elaborated on, through this whole slew of initiatives that we've developed over the years. Universities the world over have the responsibility for cultivating talent of all sorts for the country and for the world. I think our Singapore speaker, our Pro-Chancellor, Mr. Ngiam Tong Dao, this afternoon will speak about universities as strategic assets. As strategic assets, universities have particular responsibility for this. As Asia transforms, Asian universities need to consider their changing roles in talent development. The changing roles need to consider the balance between specialization, particularly professional learning of the past, and broad-based learning. Again, I emphasize not throwing one out for the other, but a better balance of the two perhaps. And the balance between cultivating national citizenship and identity and global citizenship and global communities. I end there, and thank you very much for your attention.